The second I opened the attic door, my stomach dropped, because I could feel what was missing before I even saw it. There's a kind of silence that only happens when something important is gone. Not noise silence. Memory silence. The kind that presses against your chest. That's what hit me as I stared at the floor where my storage trunk had always been. 45 years of letters. Gone. Just a clean square of wood, untouched by dust. Like a lie someone tried to erase too carefully. For half a second, I told myself maybe I'd moved it. I'm 70. People expect you to forget things at this age. And after a while, you start questioning yourself before anyone else gets the chance. But no. I remembered exactly where that trunk sat. And I remembered the soft footsteps I'd heard the night before. Slow, cautious steps on attic stairs I hadn't climbed. I didn't panic. You don't live 7 decades without learning how to breathe through pain. I stood there, one hand on the railing, letting the truth soak in like cold water creeping up your legs. Those letters weren't junk. They were my life. Notes from my mother before cancer took her. Postcards from my sister when she ran off to Wyoming. Crayon-written notes from my kids when they still thought I knew everything. And letters from my husband, Robert. Letters that kept him alive for me long after the funeral. I went downstairs quietly. The house smelled wrong. Too clean. Lemon disinfectant. Not my scent. Not my hands. And that's when I saw her. Emily. My daughter-in-law stood at the kitchen sink. Humming like this was just another pleasant morning. Wiping counters with that cheerful efficiency she uses when she's already crossed a line, but plans to pretend she hasn't. Morning, Linda, she said, not turning around. I organized a little yesterday. That attic was a disaster. My throat tightened. Organized what exactly? She finally faced me, smiling. The fake one. Old boxes. Papers. Stuff you don't need anymore. Honestly, keeping all that at your age isn't healthy. That's when I knew. She didn't throw away clutter. She threw away proof. And standing there, I understood something I'd been avoiding for months. Emily wasn't cleaning my house. She was clearing me out of it. What she didn't know yet was that one of those letters held the truth about who actually owned this house. And tomorrow, I was going to make sure she learned that the hard way. When your own child chooses silence over defending you, that betrayal hits harder than anything a stranger could ever do. I didn't yell at Emily. I didn't cry either. Silence has always been my weapon. While she kept clanking dishes like nothing mattered, I asked the only question that did. Where did you put the things you threw out? She shrugged. Trash came this morning. Long gone. Long gone. I went back upstairs later alone. That empty square in the attic stared back at me like an accusation. But beneath the grief, something steadier started forming. Anger doesn't always scream. Sometimes it sharpens. By noon my son Mark called. Mom, he said quickly, distracted. Emily said you were upset. She threw away my letters, I told him. All of them. There was a pause. Not concern, calculation. I'm sure she didn't mean anything by it, he said. She was just organizing. Organizing my life right out of existence. One of those letters was important, I said carefully. Important how? His patience was already thinning. I don't really have time for this right now. You never do, I thought. That's when he said it. The thing Emily had been circling for months. We've been thinking. Maybe it's time you moved somewhere easier. A condo. Fewer stairs. Safer. Safer. Another word people use when they want control. And this house? I asked. Another pause. Well, selling it would help. I hung up after that. Sat there feeling something heavy settle in my chest. Not age, not weakness. Understanding. My son wasn't standing beside me anymore. He was standing behind her. That afternoon, I went through my files. Insurance papers. Old statements. Anything Emily hadn't touched yet. The letter was gone, but not the man who helped my husband write it. I found the name in my old address book. Frank Reynolds. Attorney. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from fear. From clarity. At 70, you stop waiting for permission. Tomorrow, I was going to knock on a door that held the truth. And once I had it, they wouldn't be able to pretend I was just a forgetful old woman ever again. The moment the old lawyer said my husband's name, I knew Emily hadn't won. She just moved too fast. I drove into town early, before doubt had time to catch up with me. The kind of morning where the air feels sharp enough to wake you up properly. Frank Reynolds lived in a quiet assisted living complex now. The kind with trimmed hedges and benches no one ever used. When he opened the door, he stared at me for a second longer than comfort allows. Then his face softened. "Linda Carter," he said. "I was wondering when you'd come." That sentence alone told me everything. I stepped inside. His apartment smelled like old books and coffee. Familiar. Safe. He sat slowly, motioning for me to do the same. "They threw away my letters," I said. "Straight to it. Including the one Robert asked you to prepare." Frank closed his eyes. Just briefly, like someone acknowledging a truth they already expected. "Robert was worried," he said. "Not about you. About influence." That word again. He told me Robert had insisted on a duplicate copy. Not filed publicly. Not handed to family. Locked away with Frank, just in case someone ever tried to outmaneuver me quietly. "You still have it?" I asked. "I believe so," he said. "Archived. It'll take time." Time I didn't have, but hope doesn't ask permission. When I left, my hands were steady. Emily thought age made me slow. What it really did was teach me patience. What I didn't know yet was that Emily was already planning her next move while I was reclaiming mine. When someone starts talking about your safety, what they usually mean is your obedience. Emily didn't bother hiding it anymore. "Mark and I talked," she said that evening, arms crossed in my kitchen like she owned the place. "This house isn't practical for you." There it was again. Practical. I folded a dish towel slowly. "I'm not moving." Her smile tightened. "Linda, you've been forgetful lately." That was the line. The one meant to plant doubt. To make me second-guess my own mind. "I remember enough," I said calmly. "Enough to know this house isn't yours." She laughed, but it cracked halfway through. "You're being emotional." "No," I said. "I'm being alert." Mark came home late. Tired. Torn. He didn't look at me when Emily brought up selling again. That night, I checked my documents drawer. Everything's still there. For now. But something had shifted. They weren't asking anymore. They were preparing. And the next morning, I got a phone call that proved exactly how far Emily was willing to go to take control of my life. The phone rang once. And in that second, I knew either my life was about to shrink, or finally snap back into place. "Mrs. Carter," the woman said. "This is Rachel from Reynolds and Cole. We found the document." I had to sit down. Not because I was weak, but because relief has weight when you've been carrying fear too long. She explained it slowly, carefully. The duplicate letter. Signed. Witnessed. Legal. Clear. The house was mine. Fully. No shared ownership. No loopholes. No room for interpretation. Robert had known. Long before I did. When I hung up, I stared at the kitchen wall, realizing something important. Emily hadn't just underestimated me. She'd underestimated my husband. I drove to the law office the next morning. I held the document in my hands, tracing Robert's handwriting like it might disappear again if I didn't. This wasn't revenge. This was protection, delayed but not denied. When I pulled into my driveway, Emily's car was already there. She stood up the moment I walked in. "Where were you?" I placed the folder on the table between us. "That," I said, "is why you shouldn't throw away things that don't belong to you." Her face changed. Not anger, fear. But fear makes people dangerous. And Emily wasn't done trying to win. The moment Emily realized she'd lost legal control, she went after something else, my son. Mark showed up that night alone. No esmail. No confidence. Just exhaustion. "She says you're planning something," he said. "I already did," I replied. I protected myself. He rubbed his face. "Mom, she thinks you're not capable anymore." That hurt. Not because it was new, but because he let her say it. "I raised you," I said quietly. I didn't forget how. He didn't argue. That's how I knew doubt had finally cracked through him. Emily stormed in halfway through the conversation, furious now. "No musk. No softness. You went behind our backs," she snapped. "No," I said. You went ahead of yours. I told them both the truth. About the document. About the duplicate. About Robert's foresight. Mark looked stunned. Emily looked trapped. This changes nothing, she said. But her voice shook. It changes everything, I answered. Because now they knew something crucial. I wasn't confused. I wasn't powerless. And I wasn't leaving. What Emily didn't realize yet was that the next decision I made would decide who stayed in my life and who didn't. The most dangerous thing a woman like me can do isn't yell. It's stop explaining herself. That night after Emily stormed out, I didn't chase her words or try to soften mine. I washed my cup, dried it, and put it back in the cabinet like my hands weren't shaking. Because I'd spent too many years confusing politeness with survival. Mark sat at the table long after she left. Silent. Torn. My son looked like a boy again. Lost between the person who raised him and the woman who now spoke the loudest in his life. She's scared, he said finally. So am I replied. The difference is, I'm not stealing control to feel better. That landed. I could see it in his eyes. I told him everything then. About the letters. About Robert insisting on backups. About how Emily had asked questions months earlier that suddenly made sense. Not curiosity, inventory. You didn't notice, I said gently. Because you didn't want to. He nodded. Slow. Painful. Honest. I think she planned this, he admitted. That was the first time he said she instead of we. The next morning, I called the bank. Removed names. Updated access. Then the county office. Then my insurance. One call after another. I closed doors I didn't even realize I'd left open. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. That afternoon, my granddaughter Chloe stopped by. 22. Sharp eyes. Softer heart. Grandma, she said. Dad told me everything. I braced myself. Instead, she hugged me. I'm on your side, she whispered. And for the first time since the attic door opened to emptiness, I felt something solid beneath my feet again. But peace never lasts long when someone realizes they're losing. And Emily was about to make her boldest move yet. Emily thought the house was the prize, but she never imagined I'd change the ending. 2 days later, she came back calm. Too calm. That's how you know someone's planning instead of reacting. She sat across from me with a folder of her own. Legal paper. Power of attorney language. Words meant to sound helpful while quietly removing autonomy. Just temporary, she said. In case something happens. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't flinch. I slid my own document across the table. My will, I said. Her smile faltered. I rewrote it. I continued. The house goes to Chloe. Silence hit the room like a dropped plate. Mark looked stunned. Emily looked exposed. You can't do that, she snapped. I already did. I explained calmly. Not out of revenge. Out of protection. Chloe saw me. Listened to me. Didn't try to reduce me to an inconvenience. You're punishing us, Emily hissed. No, I said. I'm choosing who protects this home when I can't. Mark stood slowly. For the first time, he didn't side with her immediately. You crossed a line, he said to Emily. She stared at him like she didn't recognize the man standing there. That night, she packed a bag. Not to leave forever, but to regroup. And I knew something important had shifted. The house wasn't quiet because I was alone. It was quiet because control had finally left the room. What none of them knew yet was that the final confrontation wouldn't be loud. It would be irreversible. The final fight didn't happen when voices were raised. It happened when I stopped being afraid of losing them. Emily came back 3 days later. No sutkas. No apologies. Just resolve sharpened into something cold. Mark followed behind her, quieter than I'd ever seen him. Like a man who already knew the outcome but hoped denial might still save him. She didn't sit this time. I spoke to a lawyer, she said. You're isolating yourself. That can be considered cognitive decline. There it was. The nuclear option. I nodded once. Good. So did I. Mark's head snapped up. Emily's confidence flickered, just a fraction. I pulled out the notarized documents. Ownership. Updated accounts. My rewritten will. Medical directives. Every safeguard sealed and witnessed. I'm not confused, I said evenly. I'm finished being managed. Emily scoffed. You're making decisions out of spite. No, iraplia. I'm making them out of memory. I told them everything then. How Robert predicted this exact situation. How he worried that kindness would be mistaken for weakness. How he trusted me to stand when the time came. Mark finally spoke. His voice broke. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Because, I said softly. You stopped asking who I was. You only asked what was convenient. That landed harder than yelling ever could. Emily stepped forward. You're tearing this family apart. I met her eyes. You tried to remove me from my own life. Families don't survive that. Silence swallowed the room. Mark looked at her. Then at me. And for the first time in years, he chose truth over comfort. I think you need to leave, he said to her. Emily stared at him like he'd betrayed her. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She smiled. This isn't over, she said, grabbing her coat. I watched her walk out, not victorious, but finally unafraid. What she didn't understand yet was that the ending was already written, and she wasn't in control of it. When the door closed behind her, the house didn't feel empty. It felt relieved. Mark stayed. We sat across from each other, two adults finally meeting without illusion. I failed you, he said. You forgot me, I answered. There's a difference. We talked for hours. About Robert. About fear. About how easy it is to hand your spine to someone louder when you're tired. I didn't excuse him, but I didn't exile him either. I'm staying, he said. In your life. On your terms. I nodded. That was all I needed. Weeks passed. The house settled back into itself. The air changed. The silence softened. Chloe came by often. Laughter returned. Not loud, real. I replaced the attic trunk. Not with letters. I'd mourned those, but with something new. Documents. Photos. Proof. Not because I feared forgetting. Because I trusted remembering. One evening, I sat alone on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees Robert planted decades ago. I realized something important then. Aging doesn't make you smaller. Being ignored does. And the moment you reclaim your voice, everything that tried to erase you loses its power. I wasn't saved by a document. I was saved by the moment I decided I still mattered. And I always had. Because the most dangerous thing you can underestimate is a woman who finally remembers who she is. If this story moved you even a little, don't scroll away. Hit the like button so more people who need this message can find it. Subscribe to the channel if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, because there are more coming that will stay with you long after they end. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated or pushed aside when you knew you still had strength left? I read every comment, and your story matters here.